The U.S. has eased sanctions on some shipments of Iranian oil to help boost flagging global supplies. For the next 30 days, vessels that were loaded in Iran and are now stranded at sea will be able to deliver oil and other petroleum products. U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent says the measure will quickly bring 140 million barrels to global markets. Well, John Hendren joins me now live from Washington, D.C. So, John, the U.S. is now going to be lifting sanctions on some Iranian oil stranded in tankers. What are we to read into that?
Well, the Trump administration has been under fire for rising global oil prices and the knock-on costs that brings to other products, all of which have to be transported one way or another. What Trump is hoping to do is to increase the supply of oil. This is something that was just posted on the Treasury Department website, and it lifts sanctions on oil of Iranian origin. And it specifically says, loaded on any vessel. And then it lists a number of sanctions, including Russian sanctions, weapons of mass destruction sanctions, and it says including vessels that are subject to those sanctions. So that would mean any vessel could carry Iranian oil away and sell it. Theoretically, that would mean that Iran could sell it and that could, among other things, fuel its war machine. On the other hand, theoretically, if someone else were to take over the Khark Island or oil production there, they also would be allowed to sell that oil. I'm not saying we have any information on that. We don't. But it's an interesting move because it would seem to be counterproductive of the U.S. over all of these many years to be carrying out sanctions that block Iran from selling oil and make it very difficult for it to make money off it, and then suddenly release it at a time when it is at war with Iran. So it seems to be a juxtaposition here in the U.S. I suppose we'll find out in the coming weeks exactly how that will be carried out.
John, as we try to decipher how all this is going to be going on, we've also heard a lot from Donald Trump today, from remarks that he's made to reporters, to posts that he's made on Truth Social. What all has he been saying?
Trump has made something of a campaign over the last 24 hours of assaulting his European allies and NATO in particular. He issued a social media post earlier saying NATO was a paper tiger, that they were cowards, they were complaining of high oil prices, but they were not willing to protect the Strait of Hormuz. That's what he really wants the allies to do. He also called out Australia, Japan, South Korea, and when he was asked about the UK, saying the U.S. could use UK bases in order to carry out its operation in Iran, he said they should have acted a lot faster. He's been highly critical about that. And in a social media post just in the last couple hours, he said, we're getting very close to meeting our objectives as we consider winding down our great military efforts in the Middle East. But then he goes on to essentially threaten not to protect the Strait of Hormuz. He says the Hormuz Strait will have to be guarded and policed as necessary by other nations who use it. The United States does not. If asked, we will help these countries in their Hormuz efforts, but it shouldn't be necessary once Iran's threat is eradicated. Importantly, it will be an easy military operation for them. It should be said that NATO, it is not in NATO's charter to operate in that area. It has operated outside of Europe in the past, including in Afghanistan and elsewhere. But the U.S. is essentially saying this war is nearly over, but we need you to police the Strait. We're not going to do it. Whether that decision will stand, we'll just have to see.
All right. That's Al Jazeera's John Hendren live for us from Washington, D.C. John, thanks so much for unpacking all that for us. Kenneth Katzman is a senior fellow at the Soufan Center. He joins us now live from Miami in Florida. Kenneth, thanks for being with us here on Al Jazeera. Look, let me ask you first. U.S. President Donald Trump has said that the U.S. is considering winding down the war in Iran. He's also said the U.S. is close to meeting its objectives. But then, as we heard just a moment ago from John Hendren in Washington, D.C., he's been saying that he wants other countries to help protect the Strait of Hormuz. And now there are these reports that thousands more U.S. service members could be deployed to the region along with warships. What to make of all this mixed messaging coming from the U.S. administration?
Well, thank you for having me again. Yeah, well, it's hard to sort it out, isn't it? There's a lot of contradictory themes going on. I think on the statement that he issued on Truth Social today, he's essentially trying to tell Iran, you have no leverage. We don't need the Strait. We don't need oil from the Strait of Hormuz. The United States has its own oil. So if you think this is a card in your hands, you're wrong. And then he's also putting pressure on the Europeans to get involved because they need the oil supplies more than we do. And also, most of that oil actually goes to Asia that goes through the Strait of Hormuz. So he's putting up pressure on Japan, Korea, and others. There's that, and then there's this other theme of more troops going, including there's reports tonight of the 82nd Airborne may be sent over. So clearly, he's trying to pull all the levers against Iran to show that Iran is not in the driver's seat. It's the United States in the driver's seat. And it's in your interest to make the concessions you need to now, or else it's going to get worse for you.
Kenneth, let me pick up on one of the points you were just making. The Trump is essentially trying to send a message that we don't need the Strait of Hormuz, that other countries need it more. That's why they need to help protect it. But look, it's also been reported that the Trump administration is seriously considering a plan to potentially occupy Khark Island as a way to try and pressure Iran to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. Before we get into sort of a wider discussion about that, let me first ask you not just how difficult it would be for the U.S. to seize this island, but also how tough it would be for the U.S. to hold it.
Well, that's the main issue. I don't think seizing it is going to be difficult for U.S. Marines, U.S. Army troops. That's, I don't think, going to be that difficult. It's the issue of what do you do when you get there? I mean, they would conceivably hold it as leverage against Iran, which means they're staying more than a few hours or days, right? And so that gives Iran an opportunity to set up drones, to set up short-range ballistic missiles firings against the troops. So they would have to, build up defenses, have to bring defenses onto the island to make sure they're not just sitting ducks on that little island.
Kenneth, let me ask you from your vantage point, I mean, how many troops would be needed for an operation like this? And if it actually happened, if the U.S. were to seize the island and keep the island, I mean, would that actually give the U.S. the leverage that they need against Iran? Would Iran then capitulate to these demands?
Yeah, no, I don't think so, which is why I don't think really seizing Khark Island would be, if there's ground troops used, I don't think seizing Khark would necessarily be the best use of that. I think more likely there would be seizure of islands in the Gulf around the Strait of Hormuz, even on the Iranian coast. That would be more effective in reopening the strait. That would take, a fair number of troops. Again, the Iranians are not strong enough to resist. If the U.S. wants to take those islands, the U.S. will take them. The issue is defending them once they get there. But and the issue is if the U.S. takes the town of Bandar Abbas. I mean, that is an inhabited town. It's a hub, obviously, and I think that would get the regime very rattled. Once the U.S. actually starts taking, if the U.S. were to actually start taking territory in Iran, that is going to get the regime very rattled, because that would show that the regime really might be toppled at the end of this. Right now, the regime feels very secure. They're getting bombed, but they can survive it. They'll survive. The regime will stay in power. If the U.S. starts taking territory in Iran, that is a vital threat to the regime. Particularly, let's say if the U.S. took Bandar Abbas and the population there was joyous and started dancing and celebrating, that could precipitate the entire collapse of the entire regime, theoretically, if these things were to happen.
All right. Kenneth Katzman, Senior Fellow at the Soufan Center. Thanks so much for being with us here on Al Jazeera. We appreciate it.